Most people probably do not think about forest fires much till they come into close proximity to one. Sometimes coming close to a fire is mostly an inconvenience, such as a road closure while attempting to travel from point A to point B. However, for property owners and government officials, fires create hardships and unexpected expenses. And in the wake of a fire is an altered forest ecosystem. Nearby poorly planned developments affected by the fire are devastated. This is a modern picture painted in the minds of people by journalists that broadcast sensational images of destruction and devastation through every media imaginable, and rightfully so. Fires are a tremendous burden on economies, taxing resources while destroying infrastructures. Property owners that have lost homes and in some cases loved ones have an emotional connection to the fire. Although fire is inevitable, the outcome is highly influenced by local ordinance and land use policies. Land use policies and cultural attitudes factor heavily into why modern forest fires are so devastating. Historically, forests have burned in cycles, and tree rings indicate that fires occurred at most every 40 to 50 years. Obviously, trees survive those fires. In modern times, ladder fires catch canopies on fire, causing total destruction to the forest, killing trees and entire ecosystems, taking nature 100 years or more to repair. Aldo Leopold, in a Sand County Almanac, explains the changing dynamics of forests, a direct result of humans seeking pasture land for domesticated animals and places to farm. Wallace Kaufman, a developer, destroys forests and other places on purpose for personal gain, allowable and in conformance to local regulations and land use policies, as he explains in his story, Confessions of a Developer. There is a shared responsibility between government, landowners, and citizens in general to understand the situation regarding forests, moving from local treatment of conditions to restoration of forest health. And environmental literature plays an integral part in the process. The original inhabitants of North America are given great leeway, regarded as wonderful stewards of the land, a benign people treading lightly on the land. Fire scientists that study tree rings often attribute fires to natural causes. However, research is finding an opposite truth, that Indians intentionally caused fires, altered water flow through canals, were agrarian, and grazed horses, sheep, and cattle as early as the 1600s. The first fur traders and explorers that invaded remote regions of North America observed large burned areas and clearings with dead trees littering the landscape. The next wave of intruders was the settler. Although their accounts are incomplete, many report scorched trees and open prairies with fertile soils, as well as tall grasses in the river basins. Aldo Leopold does not include the intentional setting of fires in a Sand County Almanac by Native Americans that accounts for clearings, but does explain a natural evolution, a sort of war between trees and grasslands. And although speaking about Wisconsin, his comments are relevant to modern forests in general. Have you ever wondered why a thick crust of corky bark covers the whole tree, even to the smallest twigs? This is armor. Bur oaks were the shock troops sent by the invading forest to storm the prairie. Fire is what they had to fight. Each April, before the new grasses had covered the prairie with unburnable greenery, fires ran at will over the land, sparing only such old oaks as had grown bark too thick to scorch. Most of these groves of scattered veterans, known to the pioneers as oak openings, consisted of bur oak. Jonathan Carver, on October 10, 1763, states, after climbing to the top of a hill with a great view of the country, for many miles nothing was to be seen but lesser mountains, which appeared at the distance like haycocks, they being free from trees. Only a few groves of hickory and stunted oak covered some of the valleys. But where is the connection to what Leopold and Carver describe? The connection refers back to Native Americans. Stephen Pine describes the consequences of intentional fires set by Native Americans this way. The modification of the American continent by fire at the hands of Native Americans was the result of repeated controlled surface burns on a cycle of 1 to 3 years, broken by occasional holocausts from escaped fires and periodic conflagrations during times of drought. So extensive were the cumulative effects of these modifications that it may be said that the general consequence of the Indian occupation of the New World was to replace forested land with grassland or savanna, or, where the forest persisted, to open it up and free it from underbrush. Most of the impenetrable woods encountered by explorers were in bogs or swamps from which fire was excluded. Naturally drained landscape was nearly everywhere burned. Conversely, almost everywhere the European went, forest followed. The great American forest may be more a product of settlement than a victim of it. It is important to note that one subsequent result of setting fires is the removal of underbrush, the source of ladder fuels. If these ladder fuels are not present, the tree has a better chance of survival, because the canopy is not involved in surface fires. The depreciation of forest health and increase of devastation resulting in the large geographical area of modern forests begins with the arrival of settlers around 1840. And according to Leopold, the settler intervened in the prairie battle. He did not mean to. He just plowed enough fields to deprive the prairie of its immemorable ally, fire. Seedling oaks forthwith romped over the grasslands in legion, and what had been the prairie region became a region of woodlot farms. Loggers at the turn of the 20th century reaped the benefits of expanding forests, clear-cutting forests with no intention of restoration. Logging, according to James Fickle, in a paper entitled Mississippi Forest and Forestry, is to them an operation based on getting a rapid cut to pay interest, dividends, and taxes, and to depreciate the plant on the theory that everything, plant, railroad rolling stock, equipment, town, and so on, would be liquidated when the last tree was cut. J.B. White, an influential leader of the southern pine industry, stated in 1912, "Conservation of natural resources comes only when it is discovered where and how it will pay to conserve." It's a long way from the black eye of loggers that raped the forest to fledgling foresters, paving the way for modern research of forest and fuel mitigation to restore forest health. A most difficult task because of perceptions based on illusions of forest users and developers exploiting situations, exposing people and property to the beauty and dangers of living in and near forests. But first, the forest needs restoration. Early restoration efforts were to reestablish forests from the devastation of uncontrolled logging practices. These efforts included research into feeding habits of range cattle and the impact on newly planted seeds. Pat Curry, Carlton Edminster, and F. William Knott, doing research for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, determined that overgrazing was the cause of the most severe damage in ponderosa pine forests in Arizona and New Mexico. Ironically, cattle were not just eating the seedlings, they consumed mountain grasses that allowed the trees to fill in open parks, adding to the ladder fuels. The irony is that while planting more trees, the forest was adding to future fuels, and grazing provided the opportunity for seedling success. Fire intensity is directly related to weather, physical setting, and fuel load. Russell Graham, Sarah McCaffrey, and Teresa Jane, working for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, state 80 years of research indicates that of the three factors listed, only fuel can be treated. The slide indicates the fuel type, location, and the type of fire that results from the fuel load. Key findings of research of Graham, McCaffrey, and Jane support historical findings indicated by tree rings that fires in the ponderosa pine and Douglas fir forests of western United States occurred in 4 to 25-year cycles and were low-intensity surface fires similar to findings from the study of giant sequoia tree rings from California. Over the past 60 to 100 years, changes in forest structure and composition increased fuel loads, resulting in high-intensity, severe fires. The worst fires involve the crown or canopy of the forest. The crowns are ignited by surface fuels that ignite ladder fuels. To restore forest health, especially in forests that have not experienced fire for many decades, multiple fuel treatments are required. Treatments that thin the trees and reduce the amount of surface fuel. In modern terms, the mingling of developments with natural settings is called a wildland-urban interface, and according to Stephen Pine, in his article Spark and Sprawl, is a dumb term for a dumb problem, and both the term and the problem have dominated the American fire scene for nearly 20 years. It's a dumb term because interface is a pretty klutzy metaphor, and because the phenomenon of competing borders it describes is more complex than that geeky term suggests. At issue is a scrambling of landscape genres beyond the traditional variants of the American pastoral. It is a mingling of the quasi-urban and the quasi-wild into something that, depending on your taste, might resemble either an ecological omelet or a coniferous strip mall. The wild-urban interface is everywhere, and some events, like the Hayman fire in Colorado in 2002, rock insurance companies and are broadcast over the news with sensational headlines. And as Pine indicates, these situations are dumb, and when considering the Waldo Canyon fire in Colorado Springs in 2012, it indicates the problem is the creation of developers and lacks building codes. Developers have no allegiance to forests, and Wallace Kaufman confirms this in his story entitled Confessions of a Developer, when he states, in any case, a few people accept the development imperative and learn to build subdivisions, roads, shopping centers, and cities. Along the way, they learn to destroy woods and prairies, orchards and farms, marshes and meadows. Although there is nothing inherently wrong with desiring to live near wild places, there is something wrong with government agents that do little to understand environmental issues, allowing developers to run over the country, extracting profits, leaving property owners left holding to false hopes that all precautions have been taken. So there we have the evidence, and humans are at the root of forest degradation in modern times. In a sort of paradox, humans enjoy the very source while it is being destroyed, in a roundabout way, by good intentions. These good intentions are a shared responsibility, and everyone must play a part in correcting the situation. People must get involved by attending meetings, protesting, educating others, and encouraging government agencies to make corrections to codes and developments, forcing developers to use building materials appropriate to the location of buildings with adequate infrastructure to deal with foreseen events. The exact time and place may not be foreseen, but given the history of fire, they will occur. Also, property owners must become proactive to mitigate fuel loads on their property, and citizens need to be educated by government agencies to make decisions based in fact, not opinion or belief. For years, people have made statements that there are more trees now than ever before, and when considered without the facts, this seems to be false, when in reality it is possibly true. The consequences of fire suppression and the illusion that logging is bad and more trees is better has had terrible consequences for the forests and people that live around them. Get involved, protest, attend meetings, and above all, move to restore the health of our forests.